Well, out here with the Bel Air again, and I've been doing some wiring today, getting the headlights and directionals and stuff hooked up. And these are not the factory directionals, if you couldn't tell. What these are is a 3-inch pedestal light that I bought off of eBay. And I've used these on my tractors for just hazard lights before. The reason I like these, they fit inside the original area where the directional was, and this is the original front directional. It screwed in from the back, and then it uses like an 1157 bulb. But the problem with these is I'd have to buy front lenses for them and gaskets, and one of these was really bent. So these guys already have a light socket inside them. It's not an 1157 bulb, but it's it's pretty bright. It's a 2-filament. And it fits within the circle of the old directional. So what I did was make these chain link looking things, which just have 2 holes in them, and put the light in there, twisted it until it lined up perfectly, and snugged them down real good. And then wired a ground and a signal for the parking lights and a signal for the directionals. So I wired that behind the grill, and none of this stuff's final, but it's there for now. You know, wired it up to the dash. And inside the car, what I'm working on, this is my universal directional switch, and it has all these wires coming out of it for all the different signals that you have for the left and right directional in the front and the rear, as well as hazards and some other stuff. There's a bunch of stuff in there. So that's what I'm working on wiring up. And in the back of the car, the original taillight sockets are these here. And this is a single filament bulb, which means basically when you turn the directional on, even if you have your headlights on, you don't have a parking light. You basically just have your directional that blinks on and off. So when you're on the brakes, one brake light will be on and the other one will be flashing. Well, I wanted these to be a little bit more modern. I wanted a parking light and a directional. So what I've come up with, pretty ingenious. This is what the taillight socket looks like. So little plastic piece twists in the back, and then you have a single pole in there that goes into your filament. Well, in looking at this, I noticed these 3 little tabs on here that hold this socket in. So what I did on one of these, just to try it out, because I have 3 of these, I ground these little tabs off and popped out this internal socket, which just left the cup that goes into the taillight itself. So this just pops in the back of the taillight. Then I took my front directional, because this is a 2-wire socket, and this little piece here is just like peened over to hold it into this cup for the actual light cover. So I opened this thing up with a screwdriver, flattened it out with a screwdriver, knocked this socket out, this back piece out, and then stuck it into the original taillight socket. So I have one that I did right here, and the internal piece is brass. So what I did was popped it through the back of this taillight housing and swaged it over with a punch, actually a ball peen hammer, and then I took a punch and I hammered it around so it's nice and tight inside the socket. And then because it still only had 2 wires and these tend to get pretty crummy ground, I soldered a ground wire onto the outside of the socket because the socket's brass. So I soldered it onto the brass for the ground, and then I have my 2 wires coming out, which I just put pigtails on, going to the 2 terminals for the light bulb. So this is now going to be a 2-filament socket. And the nice thing is the way that the bulb goes down in there, it just barely comes out of this socket. So almost the entire bulb is going to be inside this metal socket, which is good. It won't be sitting too far in the taillight to melt the taillight, because 1157 bulb is probably a little bit hotter bulb than what was in there originally, but I want it to be bright enough to see, so this will take up the brunt of the heat and not ruin my taillights with my blue dots, and it should be nice and bright. So this is what you end up with the factory front socket inside the taillight socket after I soldered a ground wire onto it. And again, this is copper, so it works out really well, soldering right onto it. And now I have a nice ground wire, and I got to pop my 2 little short stubby wires back in there for the hot leads for the directional and the parking light. But pretty good. And then the backup lights are simply these single filament sockets. These ones are still in pretty good shape. Again, they're not the greatest. They're a little bit rusty, so even on these I may solder a ground wire onto them because I think these are brass as well. So that will give me a good connection for that. So pretty cool, just being a little, you know, backyard redneck engineering on this thing and trying to get my wiring done. One step at a time, the car's coming together. Mainly I wanted to get started on the wiring because it's just been hanging over my head. I really don't like doing a lot of wiring, but it needs to get done if I'm going to make this thing roadworthy this year. And I figure if I spend 2 afternoons wiring all this stuff, I'll have it done. I did not buy a harness for this, so what I did buy a couple of years ago was 1,000 feet of cable. So I have these 100-foot spools in 10 different colors, you know, red, basically all the colors of the rainbow plus green, white, and or brown, white, black, and something else. So ton of different colors, and that's what I'm using. And it works out pretty well because the harness for this switch, you have green and yellow, and I just attach green and yellow to that. Purple wire is going to be for my parking lights. Again, P for purple. P for parking, P for purple, works out pretty good. I have my headlight dimmer switch mounted down here. I got to figure out how to wire this, but it's pretty simple. One wire goes in as power. The other 2 wires coming out go to the 2 high and low beam circuits for the headlights. So I'm probably going to wire 2 relays out of this. I'll use this just as a low current from a toggle switch into this guy, and then I'll run the 2 output wires to 2 different relays for the high and the low beam, so I'm not running all the current through the switch. Again, just little tricks you can do to not burn up your car. So that's what I'm working on. It's just a big mess of wiring that I have to get everything done and, you know, run wires to the back of the car, run wires to the front of the car, and get all this stuff hooked up. So stay tuned.